It's time for fun, learning, commentary, laughs, and more, care of the most diverse group in the genealogy and family history world. Welcome to BlackProGen Live with your hosts, Nika and True, and the baddest panel in these pedigree streets, Angela, James, Linda, Alex, Ellen, Tony, Shelly, Teresa, Bernice, Felicia, Willie, Renata, and Tasia. It's BlackProGen Live, genealogy, family history research with flavor. Pullman Porters, railroad workers, unions, and more researching ancestors' occupations can add breadth of information for our family history projects. In tonight's episode, learn tips, tricks, and more on how to find records that document ancestors while on the job. Thanks for joining us for tonight's episode, which is On the Job Front, Occupational Genealogy Research. If you have a question or comment about the content for tonight, or maybe you just want to participate in the live chat, there are a lot of things happening with regard to BlackProGen Live. You can tweet us during the episode at BlackProGen or use the hashtag BlackProGen. You can also participate in the live chat to the top right of the screen on the YouTube website in your browser, and you can also do the same thing on the mobile app at the bottom part of the screen. And also here's your reminder to like our Facebook page. We post content when we're not airing the show, so be sure to go ahead and head there as well. If you've ever missed a live episode and you're not quite sure why, well, here is your reminder to set reminders. All you need to do is head to the YouTube channel and click subscribe. You can also click subscribe or set reminder on the episodes that you're interested in. And then that way you'll get a reminder each and every time we go live. Also, here is your reminder to get your BlackProGen Live merch being seen in every place, in every state, and all over the place. We have t-shirts, sweatshirts, backpacks, doggy uniforms, lunch bags, totes, all sorts of things, backpacks, all that kind of stuff, so you can get your BlackProGen Live on whenever you feel like doing so. So True will post the link in the public chat so you can head on over to get your BlackProGen Live merch today. If you are like us and you're tired of seeing Confederate flags, ships, flowers, and the wrong oil paintings as profile images for your ancestors on your online trees, well, don't fret, BlackProGen Live is here to save the day. Download our new icons for online tree profiles today. We're adding new ones all the time, so if we miss something, be sure to let us know. I'm seeing these all over the place. It's one of my favorite things to look at when looking at through lines, because on Ancestry, they show up absolutely amazing on through lines. You see them bright and red. So if somebody is a former slaveholder, yeah, the information is right there. It's right there in your face. You can't miss it if you're looking at them on through lines. So, all right, let's get started here with our show. I am so excited, everybody. We are joining you from a new platform this evening. So panelists, feel free to come off of mute if you like, and let the folks know who you are and where you're coming from. Don't all start at the same
time. Ellen Fernandez-Sacco, I'm just saying hello from Tampa, Florida.
All right. Who else is joining us this evening?
Teresa Vega, Uptown, New York City.
All right. Who else is here?
You got James Morgan. I'm battling a cold right now, but it's all good because tonight we get to talk like Rihanna said, work.
No way.
Shelley Murphy, Virginia, aka Family Tree Girl. Welcome, everyone.
All right. Shelley is in the house. Who else is here joining us?
My cuz down there.
Coming out of currently East Oakland, California. Let's work, like James said.
That sounds
work.
That song's gonna be in my head all night now.
Better have my money.
We got one more down there.
Oh, it's me, your girl.
Yeah, I said
Of my true roots. Y'all know I'm always here representing Granddaddy Ike and his 23 kids and 3 wives. And I'm here in 90-degree weather all week in Kentucky, and I am hot. So I'm ready for tonight.
Get the fan going.
Yeah.
True's in the house. We are burning up.
My Bahamas one.
Oh, okay. So she's got her Bahamas fan in the house with us this evening. You all, boy, what can we say? BlackProGen Live has been with you for 92 episodes, you all. We are inching up on 100 episodes of BlackProGen Live. You guys have almost earned your degree in BlackProGen Liveism. What are we calling it? A bachelor's of?
Oh, PhD.
Okay, because we're 90 hours plus in, right? Because the show is actually usually longer than an hour, so we're more than 90 hours in to to your education. So yeah, so we've got a lot to talk about tonight. Cheryl, let's see who's in the chat room. We've got William Merritt, BlackProGen Live panelist, Bernice Bennett. Hey, boo, she's there. Dale E. Colson, what's going on? Nice to see you this evening. Clarice Mason, Neff Hawthorne, Karen Royal, who is going to be joining us later for Ask Mariah. Let's see, who else? Lots of folks in the chat room. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's episode. We are talking jobs. Jobs. What our ancestors did for work. And that's the thing. In having this conversation, we have to be sure that we're not, super short-sighted about this, right? So what I mean by that is when we're talking about our ancestors, I think a lot of folks, they think farmer, right? They think that particular job, right? They don't necessarily think about when folks got to, locations in the North, or elsewhere, right? Maybe they worked in coal mines. Maybe they worked in a factory. Maybe they were men or women of the night. I mean, there's a lot of different, people.
Hey.
Well, you're cheering for the men and women of the night.
I'm just saying it ain't easy.
Oh,
True.
okay.
That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm second shift GM right here.
All right. See, that's the thing. You do what you have to do
Yes.
in order for you to get through, in order for you to take care of things. So let's see. The first question I have to ask the panel tonight, our illustrious panel, is why should we even bother with doing occupational genealogy research? What's the point? I mean, because all I really care about are the birth and death dates.
Well, let's hope not.
Really?
Let's hope not. I love the question.
I'm arguing. I'm being devil's advocate right now. So why should I care?
Well, since I opened my mouth, I will say, I think it's very important to figure out or find out what an occupation of someone is, because that might lead you to other resources. Some people, especially like in my family, that might have been a bricklayer or something like that, had key skills and were able to go to different places also. So it helps in if there's migration, you're going to always find that bricklayer, that carpenter, and people like that. So I think it's key to finding also what they were doing and where they were doing it at.
And I would add that it sort of contextualizes their lives. So as cousin Shelley just said, for instance, in my family, you have a lot of coopers, you have carpenters, well, those were skilled labor. So you can find out more about the occupation and the status within society that these folks had. And then from there, you can move on. But again, we're family historians. So we're not just genealogists. We're not looking just birth and death records. We want to be able to situate our ancestors and find out how they lived their lives and how they built their communities and all this other information. So it's very important that you know occupations.
Absolutely. Also to piggyback on that, on the contextualization aspect, I think it's important because you learn about not just skill sets, but also for many people, especially as we get closer to the present, many of our ancestors actually did have to start going through some type of formal schooling or other institutions. They may have been in touch with certain people. They may have been in a position at a particular time and place that can help you in your research. One of the things that I know for myself that my descendants may find interesting is that, you know, outside of getting my $1 million royalty checks from BlackProGen Live every other week, I actually work as am employed by the federal government, and I was employed with the government under the Obama administration and under the current person that's there. And so that would help my descendants to say, hey, you know, granddaddy was around when the big government shutdown of 2019 occurred. He was around when this happened. So again, it helps contextualize. And remember, just like with yourselves, we spend a lot of our lives at our jobs. And so that's going to tell you a lot about the person as well.
I want to
Think about
in their experiences.
Just to follow up with that. Also, imagine if, for a lot of our ancestors, for instance, if you're a miner or a sugar refiner or all of these other things, let something happen at these locations, right? So, for instance, in Louisiana, after some storm or some event, there was a terrible disaster at a sugar refinery that took out tons of Black workers. So the Times-Picayune, of course, Nika and I both love the Times-Picayune newspaper, right? They published a list of all of those workers and all of those casualties basically from that incident. So you can always find more context in that source. So just as James said, you know, during the government shutdown, that's definitely a historic event that happened during our lives, and more importantly, his for working in the government at that time. Imagine all of these other occupations. If there's a drought, the farmers are affected. If there's this and that, the
hurricanes.
So those things are very important. They can shift the whole family's course like that.
Yeah, think about the hurricane like now. You know what I mean, Alex?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of hurricanes, Ellen and I both had ancestors who, when the hurricanes hit Puerto Rico in the late 1890s, massive migration to Hawaii to work on the sugar
and that was like a
plantations there.
forced, practically a semi-forced, pretty coercive situation where they shoved people in boats and then they stuffed them in trains going across country in cattle cars, and then they stuffed them on boats to go to Hawaii. And that was after the Santiago hurricane of 1898. But something I wanted to add was just the process of industrialization, and that you could also see that in a microcosm in your own family in terms of if people were involved in something like piecework. You know, like in Puerto Rico, they tried to, they struck against the unionization of workers in New York City with like the garment workers industry. And what they did was they pulled the jobs and they sent them to Puerto Rico because people down there weren't unionized. So what you had was a whole bunch of people in different communities sewing different things, everything from children to women and the men who pick these bundles up and take them to different places. And like knowing the local history, and sometimes it comes through the oral history. Like my mom used to tell me, well, she would show me these knots that she learned in fabric, you know, that how to do it with a needle, you know, and they used to use that for decorating handkerchiefs or something in the 1940s, you know, but it leaves you with these skills, and like people learn them from each other, they pass them on. So there's a lot to it. And then, you know, when you pull back on the macro level, then you really see a lot more stuff going on and how that affects the work environment for our ancestors.
I'll bring up some really interesting points to me when it comes to this. One of the things that I'm thinking about is, of course, naturally, we're all working for the most part, right? Or some of us are retired, but we spend more waking hours with our coworkers than we do with our own families.
Right.
And so when folks may be short-sighted and may think, you know, at the onset, oh, well, why should I research what they did for work? Well, I mean, think about our lives. The folks that are coming after us, they would be completely crazy not to research our work lives, right? Like, you know, earlier today when I was talking to Shelly when she was parking, and she was telling me all of her deliberations with her trying to park at the University of Virginia, like that, the fact that that's a part of her day, and who she saw and the sights and sounds, you know, if I was making a diary or writing a diary, I would have talked about me and Shelly's 8 a.m. conversation that we have. And usually it's on our way to work, right? It's not on my way home, it's on my way to work. So there are so many little striations. Ellen really touched on this. And I think this is something that's really important too, and we have conversations about this as America became more capitalist in nature, the traditional jobs that we saw our ancestors working were shifted to other countries. And that's a big reason probably why folks don't necessarily think about occupations, because most folks don't have an occupation, at least in the traditional sense that we think about it, right? Like a carpenter or an electrician, right? You know, millennials, I know, they move from job to job every 2 or 3 years. They don't have loyalty to anybody, right? So, I mean, so there's a lot of different aspects of this. So what would be the benefit of researching occupations in terms of your ancestors, right? Because this kind of goes side by side with the genealogy research, right? Because one of the columns on the census is, well, what do you do? Right? Clearly that's information we should know, but what's the benefit of researching occupational stuff?
I think that what it does, it's another aspect of a person's life where you get to see kind of what they chose to do or what their circumstance was or what have you, that you don't really get from just saying, okay, well, they lived near this person or they lived around the corner from this person. I mean, I live in an apartment complex. I don't know anybody else who lives in this building at all, but you'll see them on a census record next to James Morgan, and that can give you some context to my life. But I spend more time at my office downtown, you know, around those people, whether we're friends or not. It provides more context for you. It can show you, you know, for some people, you know, someone was researching me, let's say, as an example, you may say, well, how the heck did he find time to do all this research and stuff? Well, because of where I work, we actually happen to have a library there, which I use to research. I do work near the DAR library as well. I'm like a block or two away. So I have that ability to do that. Other people may not, right? But again, if you don't know that context, I mean, you can know where I live and you would have no idea that that's where I go to do research, or I'm within commuting distance to the Library of Congress, right? So I think it's important to always find the circumstances and the people that our ancestors purposely placed themselves around, not just looking at a census and saying, oh, they live near this person, maybe they're related or maybe they were friends.
It's interesting that you say that. I'm going to take a little different twist. My great-grandfather, who served in Civil War, he whittled, and he whittled a lot. We have a chair that he whittled. Still, he died in 1916 and served in the Civil War. So I think these occupations and the things and the skilled laborers that our ancestors are, some of us will have that little piece of that too. So I think, and that's something we're holding on in the family. You know, I hope I could get it from my cousin's house, but you know, she's holding on it though, but it's a kid's chair, and that he had whittled for grandkids, and it's been coming down through the family, and again, still there. So I can touch something that he touched. And to me, that's kind of special.
I think it's interesting because it raises all these questions, you know, like a set of questions can come around out of this object that's left by your grandfather, how he acquired those skills, how he, you know, how that got how popular was that, you know? Really, you don't have guys sitting around with knives going like whittling things anymore.
Yeah.
You know,
he was in the infantry, but you know, so no telling, people that whittled did it everywhere.
There's a lot of dead time in wartime.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and then traditionally you see trades passed down to children, right? Because you had to have a family operation that would, you know, so if you were a carpenter, your sons were carpenters. If, you know, you were a midwife, your daughters became midwives, right? There were skills that were transferable that way. And especially in communities that have been marginalized away from education, right? Traditional education, historically, you have to weigh these things and you have to really consider their occupations because they didn't have a way, you know, they weren't able to go to college. or, you know, the education that they got was in the field, right? In terms of like working day to day. It may have been something that it may have been passed down because of slavery. So that may have been a job that they may have had while they were enslaved, or a skill that they picked up while they were enslaved. But the other thing is too, while slavery did nurture certain positions and you were forced into jobs, let's talk about that, right? Because it may not necessarily have been something you were interested in. You didn't have a choice, right? You just had to work this job. Enslaved people came with occupations,
Right.
and they came with skills, and they came with, you know, knowledge of different languages and cultures and being literate, things like that, that I think when we talk about occupations, folks, I think sometimes are a little bit short-sighted about that and may think that, oh, well, they just may have learned that while they were enslaved. No, that might have been something that was passed down and then later
Right.
became an asset to that plantation community. And then, you know, so what do you all, in terms of the jobs our ancestors worked, like most of my family were agrarian people. They were farmers. My folks did not get into, you know, industrial jobs until the Great Migration. My grandmother retired from Campbell Soup. My mom talks about the fun Christmas gifts they used to get every year when she was a kid. She used to love to get a big old can of Campbell Soup with her name on it. They would do that, you know, but most of my folks, you know, they sold insurance, right? Worked at the mortuary, right? I think a lot of our jobs, our traditional jobs, kind of evaporated when integration took place because there was no need to have the separate funeral home, the separate grocery store, you know, whatever. We merged into society at large. So what types of jobs did our ancestors actually work?
Well,
let's have a conversation.
My ancestors in the North, they were skilled laborers. So they were carpenters, coopers. A lot of them were barbers, ministers. One of my I think third great uncles, because Newark became industrialized when Ellen was speaking, I was thinking of this. He developed, Newark, people don't know, was the #1 market for patent leather. And so he developed a technique for dyeing leather. And so that was a skilled labor job. But for the most part, you know, stagecoachmen, barbers, the skilled laborers of the crafts, that sort of thing. And then some of my ancestors, of course, in the South were, you know, enslaved people, and they were farmers as well. And then, of course, my granddad was in the funeral business. And I keep telling people I got into the cemetery business. And I was thinking of what Shelley said. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, Alex, what were you gonna, what were some of the jobs that your folks did?
So my maternal line they start off as farmers and in agrarian jobs, but most of them were actually educators. So some of the first bricks laid at Tuskegee Institution were laid by my ancestor Augustus McIntyre, and all of his daughters became educators throughout the South, from Atlanta all the way to Texas. On my father's side in New Orleans, particularly, there was a long line of slaters and plasterers. So one of the benefits of them being slaters and plasterers is that they were unionized. So there's been tons of like a thesis written about their unions, their Black men unions, and so on and so forth. And then also, I found a really, really cool newspaper article just recently, basically saying John Gilmore, which is like a 4th great grandfather of mine, Negro slater comes back from Mississippi with basically a child born out of wedlock. So this was a big deal, and they published it in the newspaper. Just this last weekend, really quick clip, I found out that one of my best friends is actually a descendant of this illegitimate kid. We did not know we grew up together. So anyways, just a little fun fact, but that little information about that occupation, I wouldn't have known that. So that's that.
Today I saw a dyer. I had not seen that as an occupation until today. I saw someone that was a dyer in Poughkeepsie, New York, and a dyer and a cleaner. So to me, it sounded almost like a precursor to, you know, a dry cleaning business, almost a little bit. That was, and of course we have to think about, you know, we think about the country preacher, right, who had more than one church, was on the circuit. He'd be with you the first Sunday, and then he's at Mount Olive the second Sunday, and then
Well,
at Great Tabernacle the third Sunday, and then the fourth Sunday he's at Greater Ebenezer New Revival Tree of Life Institutional Double Rock on the side of Road to Jericho Missionary Baptist Church Zion in Mount Calvary on the fourth Sunday.
you better be watching Don't Be a Menace. Amen.
I was waiting for you to get the joke.
Yeah,
James.
and how many of them were jacklegs, as my daddy would say? Because
That's what my mom would call them too.
The jackleg preachers.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I descend from a midwife. In fact, my great-great-grandmother was a midwife, and she delivered everyone in our family all the way up until she died. She actually was coming from a birth when she was hit by a car, and that's how she
Ooh.
died.
Oh, no.
The dust, another car had driven by, and the dust had gone up, and she went to cross the road, and another car did not see her, and she was hit by the car. And one of my most prized possessions is, I didn't realize that my grandmother had a birth certificate. Her birth certificate was signed by her grandmother, who was the midwife.
Wow.
Wow.
Generations of women, direct women, female descendants in my family on that marriage record. James, what are some of the occupations that your folks had?
Really, you guys covered a lot of them. I have a third great grandmother that was a midwife, Alberta McBride Townsend. Obviously, I have several ministers in my family. My third great grandfather, Reverend Hightower. And matter of fact, I'm going to mention this name too. My great great grandmother, Geneva Bailey Jones. Geneva Jones Bailey. Excuse me. She herself was she was a female minister in North Carolina in the early 1900s. Believe it or not. So I had some military folks, educators as well. One thing I guess I will add is, because it's a job, I got a few criminals. I got a few.
Don't we all?
Don't
we all?
Yeah. So I guess I'll add that kind of to the mix. One thing I did want to add, since Teresa mentioned barbers, there's a really good book that I was reading earlier this year called Knights of the Razor.
Oh, it's great.
Which is by Douglas Walter Bristol. I'll post the link in the chat. It was actually very informative. You got it too?
Got the link.
Yeah. It's very informative for the history of Black barbers. I was very fascinated by it. So yeah.
True,
Well,
boo.
yeah, I know. I just didn't want to be too repetitive, but my family they started in Alabama, and they were farmers, and of course they have all these different occupations, but just in my line personally, my grandfather, daddy, he was in World War II. My dad went to Vietnam, and then of course I'm a Clinton baby, and then my oldest son did 3 tours, and now he has his first child, which is a girl. So I'm wondering, if we're going to keep that legacy going with the military. And I ended up marrying a soldier that's, was a lifer, and Eddie's wife, she's prior service as well. So I think that did kind of pass down a lot. And as a lot of people know, I'm in the DAR, so I do have a patriot, and I think I've found just about someone serving in every war except for maybe 1812. That's maybe just like an uncle or something. But I see where those things were passing down, and I know we have different reasons, all 4 of us, for joining, but I think deep down inside, we really wanted to carry what Daddy started. He might have left Alabama, but Alabama didn't leave him. And it goes to show about how we're all born in 5 different states, because it's all 5 of us. So Daddy tended to go where the work was. And even after World War II, his jobs were always military related, like on depots and things, all the way up into the 80s when he retired. Because, this is a man that's born in 1918. So basically that's what I wanted to say, but we have those jacklegs and bootleggers and, farmers.
Well, a thing that I wanted to bring up, there's a reason why my backdrop is not my usual, and it's because this is the 16th Street train station in West Oakland, which was a huge hub of transportation. And Oakland was where the Brotherhood of Sleepy Car Porters existed, and so that's the reason why I decided to share this particular photo. It's one of my favorites. It's of the window. The station, of course, is is not in operation anymore. It's gorgeous. They film movies there, all sorts of stuff. The area around it is being gentrified. So please pray to whoever you believe in that they will not tear it down. Yes, let's go ahead and go and do the sacrament. And so I would imagine Pullman Porters, anyone working for the Pullman Company, railroads, huge, 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 especially in the Black community, as a starter, along with World War I, of getting African Americans and people of color out of the South and into different areas of the country. I know my family in particular, that's how they got to the West Coast, is because of my uncle who actually changed his name to George because he was was called George so many times as a Pullman Porter. He actually changed his name.
Wow. Believe
The
it or not,
movie.
But I was also going to add about the railroads, especially the formation of the early railroads was a big strong point for abolitionist activities. So when you talk about railroads, we're talking from the beginning. You had abolitionists who were involved, and I'm thinking of my ancestor, Thomas Downing. You also have the formation of unions and coming out of that. So when we talk about occupations, we need to look at the larger repercussions that happened out of those occupations.
Yeah. But Nika, on a side note, believe it or not, I have my great-great-grandfather who he was a Pullman Porter for a short period of time. His name actually was Porter. So he was a porter and his name actually was Porter.
And then mine, his name was not George, but he went by George. He ended up changing his name to George because he was called George by so many people. So yeah, that was a huge industry. I call myself a lazy seamstress. If it's got more than 7 pieces and I have to cut more than 7 pieces, I'm ready to tap out. But I love to make clothes, and that's something that several women in my family did. I had an aunt, my grandfather's sister. She had a hat shop where she made custom hats. I almost sometimes think that maybe she would have made Aretha Franklin's inauguration hat had she been alive long enough, But people who are and that is a skill that is no longer really being passed down to people anymore, is knowing how to sew, or learning how to really just that in general, even the agrarian aspects. So how do the jobs that your ancestors worked differ compared to what people are doing now? Like once my folks got to their great migration locations, the jobs they worked are pretty much what everybody works, even still now. But outside of the fact that we don't live on farms anymore, how did some of the jobs differ from what folks are doing now? I mean, I think the majority of us are stuck on a computer all day long, in order to produce. I mean, that's just what it is. How do they differ, right? Because we're talking, you guys got to remember, someone could be watching the show and they're not familiar with the amount of manual labor that was required for people to sustain themselves, whether it's through the food that they grew or the products that they produced, right? It was a lot way more manual labor. And so when I hear people, older folks, well, my so and so lived till they were 90 and blah blah blah, but it's like, but they were doing a whole lot more manual labor than we are now. But they still had hypertension. They still had strokes. Look at the death certificates. It was still there. Maybe it just got prolonged because of all that physical manual labor.
Mm-hmm.
Also being outside, the farmers.
Yeah.
And there's a saying about your hands in that earth, that people live longer because they were out there doing some of that farming. And like you said, they still had the diseases. And one thing I wanted to say, and I posted in the chat, the red caps, talking about the Pullman Porter, don't forget the red caps that were out there. My family left Indiana and coming to Michigan, and they had hopped on a train, and the red cap took them in, a family of 7, until my grandfather got a job. So the red cap was there serving the community, far as I'm concerned, to take a family of 7, that hopped on the train in the middle of the night because of a lynching nearby, so they had another unique distinction as far as the Pullman Porters did as well. But I think farming is probably number 1, in the midwifery is probably right there as far as the most that things were going on. Slave times, you had wet nurses, you know, and things like that too. So there was different jobs.
I think
I
back
would
in the
say,
Mhm.
oh, go ahead, James.
I was just gonna say, I think that way back when, jobs were a little more extreme in terms of location. Like you may have had a job that, you know, if you're a factory worker, you may be the factory worker in that same factory for year after year after year, or it was the other extreme, particularly with people like ministers, where you may be in one state one year, next state another year, you know, all type of things going on. So whereas today, I feel that we have more mobility with our jobs, but at the same time, it's not like as extreme as I'm going to be doing this like you said earlier, Nika, about people changing jobs every 2 or 3 years or what have you. You know, same job, but they may be switching to a new company. They may you know be going to business for themselves. They're also driving Uber now. Like you know, there's a bit more individual freedom, I guess you would say, in the field of occupations. And then also, I think people today are able to be a little more creative with the jobs they do. Like you actually have people today who are social media influencers. What in the world is that to a person from 1919, just 100 years ago?
Right.
What is that?
Right.
Heck, even 15 years ago, what does that mean?
The
Right?
guy with the sandwich board.
Right, exactly.
Nika, I was gonna riff off of what James said. So in my family, we have certain individuals who maintain some of the old occupations, like ministers, folks who were in the military. But again, today there's no one job. Most people will have 2, 3, 4 jobs. If so, what is it going to be in the future when we look at occupations? Which was the primary occupation? Were they a social influencer? Were they working just doing Uber on the side? You know, how is that going to be defined in the future? We have no idea.
I will say another thing that we have completely different is the luxury of HRs. So of course,
Yes.
you know, a farmer was not having an HR. If short was not
You call Joseph Atlas, please. He was like, well, HR who? You better go, you better leave. I'm
Not coming in here.
okay.
Yeah.
But also think about it like there definitely wasn't an HR for homegirl cleaning up someone's house either, for a housekeeper or a quote unquote mammy and all these other things. So we have to also look at that, because what that meant was that if there was any injustice, if there was any kind of, you know, things that we need our HR today, you know, I'm like, actually, I don't really believe in HRs like that as a millennial. Shout out Nika coming for us earlier. HRs are the devil. But in the meantime, like, I mean, you can find these times where people are actually standing up based on whatever is going on in some of their workplaces, if you get that like rare detail. So that's an important thing to note. We absolutely have like the luxury of all these records in today that we'd be able to like track people down for.
Well, but the other problem though with that too is, while we do have an HR, these are private companies. So unless, you know, and then businesses are folding into each other all the time, right?
Mhm.
So unless you can keep track of like the, you know, oh, so and so was bought by, you know, like Jimco was bought by Target, and then Target was bought by, you know what I mean? Like, you know, or Price Club is now Costco, you know, like there's no universal website. Maybe someone needs to create that for which businesses were folded into other businesses, right? Like I used to have Time Warner for my internet. Now it's Spectrum. Now, you
Yeah.
know, I used to have
Which
DirecTV.
companies
Now
were?
it's AT&T, right? So, you know, so I think in moving the conversation forward, we have to look at what would replicate HR, right?
Right.
Think about what historically, right, you could use to replicate HR for your ancestor, right? What would that look like in terms of starts and end dates? Who would you go to? Would you have to refer to a diary, right? What if your family member was a domestic? That was a job that a lot of folks got when they got to Great Migration locations, because it was work that they could do that they had already picked up when they're at home, right? So, you know, or when they were back in the ancestral location. So, you know, how do you know who the families were unless your ancestors or your folks recorded those names down? How would you know that your person actually worked for those people unless they lived in the same home, Or maybe the person who was the homeowner had a diary and they mentioned Sally or Mary or whoever the person was, right? So let's talk records. Where are we looking? What types of records should we be trying to find when it comes to our ancestors' occupations? Alex, I see your hand raised.
So one of the key places that I look, especially for New Orleans and Philadelphia, I don't know what the climate for those two places were, but a lot of Black people would actually place ads for like basically work, like to work themselves out. So if you had someone who was a housekeeper or a cook, you know, you could say call to skilled, colored, or negress, or whatever the title was going to be, cook at this address, and then that could confirm it for you. Or you could have a family that was actually employing them posting the ad, and then like try to find some ties between them. Another important one that I like to use is to look, like especially for agricultural workers. So if you're a sharecropper, I like to use, for states that it's available, the agricultural censuses, and then try to look between these two houses to try to see, okay, well, if this person was owning property and this person was owning property, then like it has to be either these two people. And for some years, they actually list how many people you've hired and how much money you've paid. So then you can kind of confirm it in between. Those are two of my favorite ways of doing that.
For me, I would say
Oh,
Well,
James?
we'll just continue right on.
And
And
back.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, James, are you back? Sorry, you had a little bit of a blip.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm here. Okay, sorry
Yeah.
about that.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, what I was saying was I really like researching ministers and whatnot. And the reason why is because I found that churches leave real serious paper trails if you know where to look, especially AME churches. I mean, between denominational publications, like you think about like the Christian Recorder, different actual history books, autobiographies and biographies of ministers, as well as women in the church as well, because we do, as I mentioned earlier, you do have women who become women of the cloth, right? So I found over time that when you do that type of work, you'd be surprised how many photographs, images and all types of things. I actually was able to find a photo of my 3 times great grandparents' house in the history of the AME Church of Alabama. But it was actually a photo of their house before they moved into it, right? Where else would I find something like that? So I'm very big on researching the churches, professional ministers, what have you, because there's a wealth of history that you can find there. Also, as a side note, I want to make sure I mention that when I was, and I think maybe everybody should do this. When I was little, my job I wanted to work at Blockbuster.
It's so funny.
My sister used to work at Blockbuster.
Yeah, unfortunately, that dream never came true for me, but that was my dream as a child. I really wanted to work at Blockbuster.
You're funny. I was going to add for James, definitely church histories, local genealogy records. I find things, newspapers, archives have a wealth of information. Sometimes you have to dig through their vertical files or their collections. One of my favorite articles is a paper right here from, it's an article that was in the Newark Daily Advertiser, and it talks about, it's an interview with Peter O'Fake, whose father was a contemporary of my 4th great grandfather. It's the history of stagecoachmen in Newark, all the way up to the point where he names all the stagecoach people, and then how they ended up losing jobs when white immigrants came in from Italy, Germany, England in the 1840s. So it's history here, so you can see how things changed over time. The Schomburg, everybody needs to go to the Schomburg. There's so many records in their collection. And again, speaking of James, he mentioned ministers. There's something called the Black Abolitionist Papers, where you can find a wealth of information there. But again, go local. Local historical records are out there and may include not only information about your ancestors, but the community that they lived in.
Yeah, I put a a ton of links inside the chat when James was talking about folks who were part of religious organizations that you sent over, James. It was a whole laundry list of different things from the history of African Methodist Episcopal Church in Alabama, African Methodism in the South, members of the General Conference of 1908 and other members of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Encyclopedia of Colored Baptists in Alabama, their leaders, their work. And don't be short-sighted in thinking that it's just folks from Alabama that are in these records. Your ancestors from all over could be mentioned in them. And so I'm also gonna, True, if you can, post the links to the Pullman Porter records and railroad records. Folks, I think, are sometimes forget that folks that were in, that were part of the railroads were not issued traditional Social Security numbers. Their numbers are different. And a lot of times they do not end up in the Social Security Death Index because of that. And so there is a separate railroad employee list, and it is actually fairly current because I know living people who are in that list, even though they worked for the railroads, not, for very long, but their names do show up. And so that is another thing to consider. We also want to talk about, we talked about barbers. We posted the link to that book that James talked about earlier. What else are we forgetting about? Of course, okay, go ahead, Alex, and then James.
One more source: criminal records and penitentiary records. Not only the work that they were doing before being incarcerated, but we also need to remember that in prison, there's also labor, and those jobs are occupations, and those are listed oftentimes on those prison records. Ancestry.com has a slew of them, and then also Family Search has them publicly available.
Excellent.
Okay, James.
Just two quick things. One of those resources that you posted in there, which was the members of the General Conference of AME Church. That book is just a book of photos and like biographies of AME ministers from all over the country. So like you said, Nika, don't just, I really want for people to check that out, because one of the things we're always looking for is photographs, right? Even if you don't have an ancestor that was a minister, you may find your ancestor's pastor or two or three of them in that book. So I wanted to make sure I highlighted that. And then also, I think we're also leaving out Black, or I don't want to say Black, but people of color journalists and newspaper men and women as well.
Yes.
And I definitely didn't want to leave that out also, because we use these resources a lot, but sometimes we don't think about the people who are behind the scenes with that. And I guess I'm thinking about it's September, so I'm thinking about my grandfather, James Sr., who was actually a newspaper printer. So I wanted to make sure I highlighted that as well, that we consider that also.
Yeah, it's something else I wanted to also bring up, because the people in the chat, when we're like, oh, well, what about city directories? There were no city directories where my family was from. So I can't rely on that as a tool. My folks were not put into directories until they hit the major cities or larger areas. So yes, while that is an easy win, is an easy tool, it may not exist for everyone, right? And that's the obvious thing, right? Folks are also bringing up draft cards. Yes, draft cards are great, but not everybody falls within the window of being able to get a draft card. So what are the other, what we're talking about, additional resources? BlackProGen, we are never going to give you the obvious stuff, because that's what everybody else does.
But Nika, James brought up a good point about photographs. So again, Library of Congress has photographs. Your local historical societies might have vertical files that include, or collections that include photographs. So you can't leave out the photograph part of it as well. And I know when I'm thinking of the New Jersey Historical Society, I found a ton of advertisements off of one of my beautician ancestors, where she used to. So you have to go to the local level and look through. Deep digging isn't easy. You need to look through some of these collections that may, like I said, I walk into an archive, let my ancestors be my guide, because sometimes I'm just fishing and looking for every little small fish. And sometimes I find big sharks, like great white ones, and it's right there, but you have to be creative in your approach and look at collections where things might not be obvious. I'm thinking of, at the Schomburg, I looked through a collection of of a New Jersey scholar. And in her collection, she had all this stuff on the history of New York City, and it include the labor leaders, the Teamsters, all this occupational stuff. So you have to keep an open mind and just cast the widest net possible when you're starting with nothing.
I just want to mention that at
go
Hunter
ahead,
College, Centro has work papers. There was I forgot what the exact name of the office was, but people had to register for about 2 or 3 decades. They had to get a photographic ID with the city in order to be able to work if they were born in Puerto Rico. So there's, and those records were actually going to be tossed out, and they were picked up by Hunter College at one point, and that became the collection at the university.
Photos, she just reminded me of passport photos where people moved from Puerto Rico.
Right, and then you have the 1910 like a slice of passport photos where people went from Puerto Rico to the Dominican Republic to work in places like La Romana, the sugar refineries that were there. So there's a lot of pockets of different kinds of information to access.
Alex?
Another one, I researched a while back out of, I can't remember what the school is in Montgomery, Alabama, but basically they have like a collection of Southern taxi cab drivers, mostly Black men. And I'll tell you right now, they're in the sex work business. I don't care what nobody says. There's a bunch of criminal records around them too. But anyways, you see them with the hat and everything, but they have photographs and they list relatives and other people. So if you could only get your hands on that, you would have access to other records to build that family tree out too. Those are
this is all Southern states, or is this just Alabama?
It was for a lot of Southern states. Yeah.
Okay. Can you see if you can bring that up? If you can find it.
It'll take me a while, but I know it's called Southern Taxi Cab Company Records.
So you're telling me this is like the original Taxi Cab Confessions, like?
You know what? I mean, because really, that's the truth, right? Newspapers are the obvious source, right? They mention where people may have worked, obituaries. What else?
Don't forget the fishermen.
Yes.
The fishing and people that lived on coastal area, Gulf areas, and things like that. You had Black fishermen and you know that did that occupation as well.
Okay. Anything else you guys can think about?
Some of our ancestors also worked in universities as well, in colleges, not just Black colleges, obviously, but we have many folks who have been everything from administrators to faculty to staff to just the lunch lady. You know, we had ancestors who actually worked in the correction system as well. I'm thinking about, I have an aunt who for like 30 something years, she was the head lunch lady at like the worst prison in New Jersey history. You know, so again, you'll find things there as well that ancestors also.
And one last thing, Nika released last week, 3,000 names? Alex, put up your book. Big up to Nika. This is the history on Scarlet and Black, is the history of Rutgers. Within these pages, they list a ton of people and their occupations affiliated with the university. And Alex had a book recently.
This one right here is Slavery in the Ivy League. And it talks all about the history of slavery integrated with universities.
And you guys are bringing up an important point too. Hello.
Yep.
You're distorted.
Yeah.
Okay. Hold on.
But
Making sure.
while you're fixing that
How can I fix it
question,
unless you hear me?
We hear you, but it's static.
It's still staticky.
Yeah.
all staticky.
Okay.
Thank you for mentioning that book, Alex. That's actually a project that I'm working on right now for the University of Virginia. I'm looking for the descendants of the enslaved laborers that actually built that university from Thomas Jefferson forward, from 1818 coming up to 1866. So there's a lot of work going on. There's a huge coalition of universities all starting to do the same thing. So thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, Shelley.
since y'all mentioned those schools, I gotta pull out my Howard University history book as well, because there's a lot of great HR references as well as mentions of students in here. So definitely check your Black college history books as well. I just had to do that since y'all brought out them other books.
We're done with you, James. We're done.
Look, I'm starting to feel better. Can you hear me? I'm starting to feel better now.
We see.
We see. Is this sound still distorted, you all?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I have a book to share, but it's not with occupation.
What's your book, Shelley?
It's the one that Bernice Bennett, we're doing this little book thing for anybody that wants to do it. And I have not read it yet, but I've been told that it is excellent.
Classic.
And so folks can chime in on it, but it came today.
Yeah.
And it's Walter Johnson, Soul by Soul, Life Inside the Antebellum Slave Market. So that's my next one to read.
I'm actually gonna get that one too. We might have to start like a BlackProGen book club or something.
Sure.
We got it going on. Nika's handling that for us right now. Meet us at the kitchen table.
Oprah, we're coming for you.
Well, no, we got Oprah. She all right.
Look at Alex.
Were you able to get all the resources to the chat room? Okay, because the panelists said over 150 million thousand resources. And the thing that's so funny to me is they just throw the links up, and so we have to kind of clean them up so they don't look crazy, so you can actually read them. So be sure to make sure that you go through the links and get everything you need from those. Anything else? I mean, you can find records for these things all over the place, you all. Like there's not one stop shop. There is no jobsgenealogy.com that you can go to and just type a name in and the records are just going to pop out of nowhere. That does not exist. You're gonna go local. We always tell people that hit the local repository first before you go anywhere else. Just to make sure that you get, the more bang for your buck. And then from there, you're going to make sure that you can use your online resources. Universities are key when it comes to a lot of these records, and libraries and repositories like the Schomburg Center, like Newberry Library for Pullman Porter records, all sorts of stuff. Don't wait for a major conglomerate to digitize records in order for you to go and look for them. Okay. And then also extract the information that you can extract from records that we use all the time, right? That stuff is not going away. So so moving forward, I'm gonna make sure I've hit the chat room to make sure that we've answered all questions. Shannon Christmas suggests checking university alumni magazines. I think that's a great idea. If folks were learned, that would be a great thing to do. Bernice, panelist on BlackProGen, she suggests, to not forget the entertainment industry. That's also something that's key. I think that's a great suggestion. Let's see, lots of people talking about railroad work. I'm pretty sure. Karen, if you're out there, this would be a great time for you to come on in and join us for Ask MARIAH, because you're up and you were going to be joining us through video. So while we wait for Karen to come on in so that she can get all of her Ask MARIAH life, any other thoughts about occupations? I think we all should, here's just advice that someone gave me. Update your resume. Make sure it's continually updated. In fact, when you take jobs off of your resume, it's probably a good idea for you to keep just a running total resume that is not all of your jobs, or that is all of your jobs versus the one that you send out when you're applying for jobs. Then that way your descendants or whoever picks up the research after you, they have a way of knowing the jobs and occupations that you had. Otherwise, how else would they know? So be sure to keep a running tally resume, right? Because we're creating records here, just like how we're looking for our ancestors. And then,
whoa,
Okay,
wow, a button, a bing.
Get a ding.
Wow.
Ding.
And pops
Aaron Harper Royal from New Orleans, whose Saints just had an epic win last night against the Houston Texans. Man,
yes.
in epic
Do
fashion
that.
with a more than 50-yard field goal last night.
Do
Just
that.
have to put that up there. Just have to say that, Miss Karen. Oh, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we are glad that you are here. Let me go ahead and get your slides ready so that the panel is not going to bug you for information, because they're going to ask 1,000,001 times. If you're new to watching BlackProGen Live and you don't know what in the world we are talking about, well, hell, let me help you. This is time for Ask Mariah, your favorite part of BlackProGen. This is the part of the show where you, the viewer, submit your questions, queries, conundrums, and more to the panel, and we weigh in live with research help specifically geared towards you. Panelists never see the queries beforehand, so you get a chance to see us work together live to help our Genius Buds get past their brick walls. And tonight we have with us live joining Miss Karen Harper Royal, and her question for this evening is this: who are Louis Richard's parents, his siblings, and where did they reside? I'd also like to know his first wife, Rosa's maiden name. So we want to know what's going on with Louis. Where is he? Who his people? Who are his brothers and sisters? Who is mom, them, pa, them? All those folks, right? We want to know all those things. And then we also want to know about his wife, Rosa. Could be Rosie, Rosa, doesn't matter. We want to know what her maiden name is. So what Karen knows: she's got a 1910 census. She's got a 1920 census. She's got a 1919 marriage record to Lizzie McIntyres. Notice this is Louisiana, I know. And she's got a 1919 marriage record. So that means that Karen has done her on-site due diligence. Let me just put that out there, because anyone researching in the state of Louisiana knows that you are most likely not going to get a marriage license for that date online. You probably all have to go to microfilm, or you will have to go locally. So let me just put that out there for the panelists, just because I know that. She's got a 1908 city directory in Baton Rouge. She's got an Ancestry.com Social Security Claims Index record. She has done Ancestry, DNA, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, African Ancestry, MyHeritage. She's uploaded MyHeritage and Jet to Jet Match, and she's tested many Richard family members. And she's got access to their DNA. And so there's also more stuff. Karen, I will fill in your additional details that you submitted to us too. She says Louis was born about 1870. Rosa was born about 1872. She does not know Rosa's parents. She suspects that Louis's parents are Louis Richard and Modeste Richard, based on the marriage record index when Louis married his second wife. And so I will put that in our little cute little chat area. And let me come back on video so I can make sure that I get this to all the panelists so they don't freak out. And she says she doesn't know when Rosa and Louis were married, but their first child was born in 1897. His name was Freddie Richard. Her ancestor, Alfred Richard, was born in 1902. Their last child together that she has was born in 1910. Rosa had 2 children prior to marrying Louis: Eddie Grinner, born about 1897, and Annie Grinner, born about 1897. Okay, and then it appears, let's see, Lizzie and Louis were Lizzie and Louis were married in 1919. They lived together in New Orleans. It appears that Louis and Rosa lived in Baton Rouge. The family oral history is that Rosa is from Baton Rouge. DNA records seem to indicate some connection to Livingston Parish, which is near Baton Rouge. She wonders if this is Rosa's family. It could be a Mickens or Nickens based on DNA match information. She has access to DNA information for 29 known descendants, Richard descendants, okay? 29 people. 3 of which descend from 3 different sons of Louis and Rosa. This is like the best Ask Mariah ever, okay? Because she laid out the full red carpet for us, y'all. It is through evaluating common matches across descendants from each of these 3 sons that I was able to figure out that we have a connection to Mickens or Nickens in Livingston Parish, which is near Baton Rouge. That is Karen's case for the evening. She has given you guys all sorts of stuff. Angela is asking what part of Louisiana do they live in, and she has repeatedly said Baton Rouge and Livingston Parish. Yes, Shelley.
Mickens and Nickens. Deep, deep Virginia. Those are surnames out of Virginia. Find that boat, girl. And when they got to Louisiana, I don't know how far you're going, but that's deep, deep. I know back to the Revolutionary War and prior, both of those names. And they do, as European, become also, you know, African Americans, mulattoes, whatever you want to call us, but those are deep. Karen Sutton is one possibly to contact on that. And for Nickens, her Revolutionary Patriot is a Nickens, and I want to say they're out of Maryland, Virginia area.
Anyone else? Suggestions? We've got a litany of DNA matches.
I'm just curious, since she did ancestry DNA, what did True Line say? Because I'm trying to see what they said.
True lines.
I'm just curious.
Well, actually, I just noticed that True Lines connected us up with a wrong Louis Richard.
Okay.
And I'm pretty certain it's the wrong family.
Right. Not anything on the Mickens then.
No. The Nickens information, I have been able to, I started researching the European Nickens family with hopes that I would find where it comes together. And what I found from our mostly European DNA matches who are Nickens, almost all of them have one African. So I found that to be interesting that they would have one, and it was different ones. African.
It'll be interesting if you trace your DNA cousin Mickens back to Virginia then, because Virginia was a major depot of Sold South.
Yeah.
So just as far as the last name Richard goes, so in Louisiana originally, a lot of the early settlers were spelling it RICARD, and it would still be pronounced the same. So there is a huge Richard family from Point Capet and St. Landry Parish. So those two families, though, I would not doubt have ties to Louis. And I say this only because I believe I just found him in my family tree under the name Louis Layton Richard. Part of the reason why I think this is just because if you notice from that 1910 census, with him and Rosa being married in 1919, that indicates another wife as the parents of those earlier children. So what I have is for a Louis Layton Richard, who was actually married to a woman named Teresa Mayer. Karen, does that line up with anything that you might have?
No, but I'm writing it down so I can check it out.
All right, and you know I'm a phone call away, so we
and
can
I have access to
it too.
Alice's tree. So hold on, let me get to where you're talking about.
So where was that marriage actually performed? Was that also Baton Rouge, the 1919?
That was New Orleans.
It was New Orleans. Okay. Yeah. Was that the place to go, for, you know?
Well, other family members who are currently living in Baton Rouge say that Rosa's family was from Baton Rouge. And Lizzie, apparently her family was from the New Orleans area. My Baton Rouge cousins tell me they remember the Lewis's son, Frank. That was their grandfather. And they tell me that they remember grandfather talking about going to Opelousas to visit his uncles. So I evaluated our DNA results to see where all of us had in common St. Landry Parish DNA connections. And we do not connect to the huge Richard family in Opelousas. But I was able to go back to, again, a European family, Bellards, the Bellard family. And so there seems to be a connection to that family through DNA. I am beginning to wonder if I'm dealing with an NPE situation because we are not connecting to the Ricards, Richards, Richards with an S. We are just not connecting to them, but we are connecting to a lot of Jacksons. And and those Jacksons, I can see a connection of a certain group of Maryland Jacksons. And some of those Maryland Jacksons connect up to a certain group of Louisiana Jacksons. And
Find
and
that ship.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a definite connection there.
Yeah, that's the one thing. I mean, you've got so many folks DNA tested until I'm wondering potentially, I mean, because there are a lot of folks from South Louisiana with these surnames who are DNA tested, and you should be able,
Yeah.
like, you should have some sort of a genetic connection to those folks. Like, it shouldn't be where like you're firing shots and you're not hitting, you know what I mean? You're not hitting anything. So it may be, I mean, it very well may be a MPE. I don't think that's, and that's the thing folks are asking, oh, did she try different spellings?
Of course.
She did.
Y'all,
We talk about Karen.
y'all, we talking about Karen.
Can I
Okay,
ask?
hold on. Y'all, come on now. With
In fact, and let me just regarding that spelling situation, let me tell you how I look for different spellings such that I found the 1910 record. If you see, that is not Richard, it's RIEHAURD on the 1910 record. So,
There you go.
Wow.
but I know it's my family because they got the right people on the record.
Right. No, I saw that too. Now, question: are you matching anyone in your DNA matches with the last name Felix?
No. Well, you know what? I haven't searched for Felix, but I can search for Felix. But
Can
I
you
will
give it a try? Because I
will
believe I
search
found
Felix.
Modest.
Mm-hmm. I'm searching. I'm going to search for Felix. Why Felix?
Because I found that 1870 and 1880 census with a Modest who is married to a man with the last name Felix, and there is a little boy named Louis that could match those same ages. So it's worth a shot.
Oh yeah. Look, I've been working on this so long. I will take any lead.
And I have a question. Our topic tonight, and I'm referring this back to Alex and Karen. Our topic tonight was occupations. Is there anything running through these families that's consistent, just like naming patterns that you could keep researching and finding based on the occupation?
No, but I will say that when Louis was in New Orleans, he was a plasterer.
Okay.
And Annie Grenner worked as a cook. Well, she later moved up to Indiana, and the family story is that she was a madame.
Okay.
And they were farmers. They were just general laborers. My ancestor, Alfred, may have been a criminal. He was killed by the New Orleans Police Department when he jumped into the river, they say by suicide, to escape robbery, arrest for robbery. That was actually written out on his death certificate. Yeah, yes. It was
okay,
totally
just wondering if we could track those occupations that we all talked about earlier. And you never know, we might find the group of the plasterers or something, and the misspelling of that Richard last name.
No, Karen, going back to Jackson, how many DNA tested relatives you can group to the Jackson? If it's
our matches, are you speaking of the matches? Probably at least 8 or 9.
And are they coming from one Jackson ancestor or several?
So there's a group from Maryland that appear to be coming from. I got 3 of them coming from the same couple.
Okay.
In Maryland, and the other surname on that is Baugh, Baugh. So
you'll get different spellings with that as well.
Yeah. But me and several of my cousins have this same little grouping of DNA matches from this Jackson Baugh family out of Maryland. So
you know where?
And I was going to say that. Did you trace them back? And I'd wonder. if they had moved to Louisiana for business or what's going on there.
Let's see. I'll tell you in just a second.
Okay.
Where in Maryland, I'll tell you. One of the things I also found is that when I was looking at the Nickens line, I had some distant cousins who were Nickens, and some of them had some Jacksons in their family.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I thought that was really odd, but it may be a clue. Okay, so Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay, so you got Angela Raji up in that area, and I know she's in the chat room, and I know you two know each other. Bernice Bennett's up in an area not far from her. So you got two folks that also do trips to the National Archives as well. So how far you're going back, or what you're doing in that area, they might be a resource for you as well.
I will also say that one of Bernice's cousins,
okay,
one of my cousins,
okay,
who is on this Jackson line.
Oh wow!
Mm-hmm.
Small world.
Yeah, I reached out to her and asked her if she had that particular cousin. Asked her if she had any Jacksons in her family, and sure enough, she does.
I'm sorry. Were you able to see if any of those Felixes popped up? Because I'm sitting here on the edge of my seat.
Okay. So when I mean, look, I took out Felix and put in Jackson. Let me put Felix back in there. and just so you guys know, the DNA relative whose DNA I used most was my 87-year-old aunt, who was my grandmother's sister. So she has DNA matches that none of us has. And so when I put Felix in there, I only got 2 matches. One is both of them are 7-centimeter matches. One of them has links to Puerto Rico. They also, my aunt was 95% African, just a little bit Portuguese and Irish, but also Native American. And so a lot of her distant matches have Native American, and they come from various places in South America.
Alex, what about this record that you sent over to me?
Okay, so the record that I sent over to you should be listing, so if you guys look there, it's a death certificate from Crowley, Louisiana, which is technically like Southwest Louisiana, just south of St. Landry Parish. You mentioned your relative saying that your grandfather would go and visit uncles in Opelousas. Crowley is just, south of Opelousas, really. It's in that same bubble, so people tend to go back and forth around that area. If you notice, the woman's name is Isabella Roberts, but it lists her father as Louis Felix and then her mother as Modeste Richard. Mm-hmm. So on another record that I can send over for you to show to the folks, I'm gonna send it to you now. First with the 1880 census and then the 1870 census has the Felix Richard family on there. And basically what I am considering is if Modeste marries Louis Felix later on, and Louis Richard is actually a product of her relationship with someone else. The only way, I guess, to prove that would be is finding one of them in either 1900 or 1910 and seeing how long they may have been married, and or seeing if we can find a marriage certificate. Probably considering the time, we may not. But they're definitely, from that area, I would almost guarantee that they're Catholic. So they could also be found in Father Hebert's records to check that out. But I do think that there's no coincidence that this woman's name is Modeste from this area, and her maiden name is listed. At least one of her relatives listed her maiden name as being Richard. I would not put that past you, just because Louis himself gave that as his parents' names in 1919.
Right. Okay. And I see that St. Martin Parish record. We have a lot of DNA matches from St. Martin Parish. All of us.
Good.
St. Martin was the original, was the original parish before they broke it into all of the others. So if you have matches from St. Martin, you could also check the other parishes too, because how it was split up. St. Martin was also a huge sugar plantation colony. So you would have tons of, there's tons of records involving the slave trade and more deep into there for all of those surrounding areas. I mean, St. Martin was a huge parish. So that's definitely something to consider.
Great.
The only thing I'd add is to look at the, in your grouped matches with your aunt, look at the folks that share the most DNA with her. Kind of in some way stay away from the folks that I would say don't really look at anyone that has probably under maybe 30 centimorgans, because that can just send you on a wild goose chase. Like, while it's good information to have, we're trying to pinpoint these parents. And so we need the earliest, we need the earliest people, and we need the closer people that we can possibly get to. So I would start to group on those like really high matches, maybe even some that you and the other people in your family don't have, or maybe in different concentrations, like and maybe you and her for one, and then like her and 2 or 3 other people for another, and just really start grouping. One of the methods that I've used, especially in trying to find unknown folks, are those marriage records. It's really vital records that have helped me a lot, because those maiden names are usually what throw us off. And we just don't know. And so it's possible, I mean, especially with this example that Alex gave, that Richard may have been his mother's name, not his father's name.
That is very possible.
And that's what he decided to go by. Taking the daddy's name when you ain't married is more recent history than back in the day. The baby used to have a mama name.
Yeah, absolutely. Quickly found that I'm not going to be stuck on the Richard name, because it wasn't working out genetically. It just, we being in Louisiana, a lot of Richards. If you're related to a Richard, you are going to be related to a whole bunch more, and we are just not. We're just not. And so it's something else, I'm sure my Richard family don't want to hear this, but I think we got an MPE, or it may just be that they took on that name, even though that was not the biological father. And so now we have to find out just who are the biological ancestors on this line. That's what I want to know.
I'm gonna just drop in real quick. The reason why I'm so invested, Richards are also my people. So I was like, let me see.
Yeah.
Let me see real quick.
I'm connected up in here somewhere too.
Karen, we got too many links. I will also say that as far as that Richard last name, let's say Modeste, that we did find them tonight. Let's say if that is the case, she could be completely unrelated to any Richards as you assume, but it's worth following the trail, because I looked up another thing. There are other Richards in allied families in that area during the time that she was born. So we could find a good little record, at least probably a deed or a conveyance listing her on it if she was enslaved. So I definitely would like to keep looking into this, because I'm curious.
And what I will do also, what I have been doing, is looking on the census records, but also looking all around for surnames that show up in my DNA, because could have been the neighbor's baby. Who knows?
Right.
Look at me come on.
It is what it is.
We're gonna try this microphone again. Is it working?
Yeah.
Yeah, now it is.
Yep. Okay, just making sure. Unplugged from one thing and went to another. All right. Well, Karen, thank you for letting us spend some time with your Richards tonight.
Well, thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us. And feel free, we're getting ready to close out the show. So if you want to stay around, feel free to stay around. But if you need some help in your genealogy research and you are, at a loss, just like Karen, maybe you have surnames showing up that ain't supposed to be there or that you thought were not supposed to be there. Be sure to submit your case to us here at BlackProGen Live for Ask Mariah. A link to submit is in the description of each and every episode of the show. Remember to be super specific, just like Karen. Let us know what records you search, what oral history you have, if you've DNA tested, and more. The more you tell us, the better. You just may get selected to be featured on one of our upcoming episodes. Moving into current events, and this is a very good one that we have for tonight. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Shelly said to check the notes from the chat room, also Karen as well. Okay, this week, Richard Abels finalized the sale of the building that housed Hall Brothers Funeral Home for nearly 80 years. His was the last Black-owned funeral home in the U Street, Florida Avenue corridor in Northwest Washington. The deaths of thousands of Washingtonians are recorded in Hall Brothers files stretching back decades. Open a volume to page 123, and there's Lawrence Monroe Riles, 39, a colored postal worker who on September 13th, 1947 was run over by a train. Turn the pages and find Melvin Bailey of 1406 3rd Street Northwest, a 6-year-old who died the same year of meningitis. Deep inside another book is Leon Anthony Porter Jr., 18, whose 1990 death occurred after a bullet pierced his skull. This compendium of fatal heart attacks, seizures, neck fractures, bullet wounds belongs to the Hall Brothers Funeral Home, whose owner was shutting down business after nearly 80 years and preparing to sell its Florida Avenue headquarters, a gracious Victorian row house across from the historic Howard Theater. The demise of Hall Brothers, the last of half a dozen Black-owned funeral partners along the U Street, Florida Avenue Northwest corridor, is another marker in the evolution of a neighborhood once at the core of the African-American life in Washington. Now the strip embodies the demographic and economic shifts that have redefined the city, with young professionals, a preponderance of them white, replacing Black families, many of which relied on Hall Brothers for sympathetic service, as one funeral home once advertised, as the funeral home once advertised on hand fans that mourners used to cool themselves at its peak. From the 1950s to the 1980s, Hall Brothers performed as many as 140 funerals a year. Quote, "What's the point?" he said after one afternoon. In the second floor office, every inch of jumble files, stray tombstones, unused urns, blank death certificates, business cards once given to prospective clients. Quote, "In the event of my death, please notify Hall Brothers Funeral Home." The cards read. At the entrance, an announcement board typically lined with dates and times for viewing the dead was bare. Quote, "I'm sitting in here dying with the business," Abel said, his face framed by a white beard and round tortoiseshell glasses. "It's time to go." Abel sold the property for about $2 million, more than twice the assessed value. That figure was unimaginable 75 years ago. Land records show that his uncle O.C.D. Hall paid $10,000 for the row house near 7th Street and Florida Avenue. Abel said he has not met the buyer, negotiating only through a real estate agent. In recent months, he sold the hearse, a bright white 1994 Cadillac. He figured he scrapped the metal Hall Brothers sign above the entrance, but the B fell off a long time ago, along with stacks of American Funeral Director magazines, a TV that hadn't been turned on in years, and his embalming tools. This is an amazing story, but you guys, this is happening all over the country. As our country changes, demographic shifts, gentrification is taking place everywhere. And don't think that it is not happening where you live. It is literally happening in every single state and so many cities. Luckily, the records that are at this this treasured, closing mortuary are being taken up by, I believe it was one of the libraries, local libraries is taking up the records from the mortuary. And, oh boy, check that story out, link in the chat. All right, whether you are new to genealogy or a seasoned veteran, it never hurts to head back to the basics. Episode 93 will cover how to make sure you're maximizing your efforts as you gather more and more information in your family history search. Join us for You Got Started How? Revisiting Your Research Project on Tuesday, September 24th, 2019, 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. And here is our call. You guys are always wondering when we're going to ask for stuff. Okay, now we're asking you for stuff, so we expect to see it. What do we want? We need the worst handwriting you've never been able to read. Literally, the absolute, yes, that you're thinking about, send us that. We want that. Why? Because we're doing an entire episode of Ask Mariah just for handwriting. The worst. I'm telling you, when it looks like something has been balled up and the ink smeared and chewed up, the dog ate it and then spit it out, and then they have the nerve to put it on microfilm and then scan it and put it online like you were going to get something out of it. That's what we want. We want the worst handwriting ever. How do you get it to us? Send submissions to us, care of our Facebook page, or DM us on Twitter at BlackProGen. This episode is airing on October 22nd. So you guys have got plenty of lead time to get us your absolute worst in life handwriting examples. I kid you not. We want the absolute worst. Send it to us so we can just we can sit there and be baffled. All right. And if you checked out all the subjects we'll be covering for season 5, guess what, you guys? We only have 8 episodes left. 8. That's it for the rest of the season. Be sure to head to whoisnikasmith.com for a downloadable schedule, and don't forget to set your reminders. Also, here's your reminder to tune into the long-running archive of the National Archives, Research of the National Archives and Beyond, with BlackProGen Live panelist Bernice Alexander Bennett. Also, be sure to check out the archive of the African Roots podcast hosted by BlackProGen Live panelist Angela Walton Raji. Visit AfricanRootsPodcast.com for more. True Lewis, you're going to go ahead and close us out for the evening.
Thank you, Nika. So Karen, we just want to thank you again. You're always a joy when you come on. And Alex, ooh, I love it. Everybody's so proud of you. Just give us ideas on how to work this stuff out. And he's so young. Excuse you, James. But we just want to thank everybody for coming out. You guys were so awesome in the chat room. And we just look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
Work.
Oh, this was a much
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen.
Hello, everybody out there. BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen Live.
The unapologetic Black and people of color viewpoint.
The place where evidence tells the stories.